All right, so today we're diving deep into the Fujifilm GF 35 70mm lens.
Yeah.
We're basing this deep dive off a review by photographer Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
He's been using this lens with his Fujifilm GFX cameras for quite a while now, testing it for portraits, landscapes, really everything.
Yeah, what's really cool is that he doesn't just go over the specs like a lot of reviewers.
Right.
He really gets into how it performs in the real world.
Exactly, and that's what we want to find out.
Yeah.
Does this lens live up to the hype?
Especially because
Yeah.
there's all this talk about this being kind of like the gateway lens to the GFX world.
Yeah, almost like Fujifilm is saying, hey, you want to try medium format magic?
Right.
Without, selling your car.
Exactly, especially because it's super affordable when you get it bundled with the GFX 50S2.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it comes in at only $500.
Right.
But even at its regular price,
Right.
$999,
So high.
it's still the most budget-friendly way to get into the GFX system.
Okay, so I'm seeing dollar signs.
Right.
But let's take a step back for a sec and talk about why this lens is a big deal for the GFX system.
Okay.
Because everyone knows that medium format is known for, let's say, its large size.
Right, yeah, and that's really where this lens stands out, because it's significantly smaller and lighter than almost every other G-mount lens.
Right, and just to clarify for anyone listening who might not know, G-mount is Fujifilm's lens mount specifically for their medium format cameras.
Exactly.
Separate from their X mount for their smaller cameras.
Right.
So it's a medium format lens, but it's actually manageable.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. So you don't need a gym membership just to carry this thing around.
Right, exactly.
But does that mean that they had to skimp on build quality to get it this small?
Not at all, actually.
Okay.
Aaron says it's surprisingly well built.
Okay.
He describes the zoom ring as really smooth.
Uh-huh.
And he notes that while it feels, slightly airy, it doesn't feel cheap. More like it's just surprisingly light for its quality.
Interesting. You know what else caught my eye?
What's that?
This lens doesn't have an aperture ring.
Oh, yeah.
Which is pretty unusual for a G-mount lens, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Most G-mount lenses have an aperture ring, so you can adjust the aperture right on the lens. But with this one, you have to use the camera dials.
Right.
And some photographers might miss that tactile control.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially if you're used to shooting with other GFX lenses.
Right.
You think they'd keep things consistent.
Right.
But, okay, so before we get too deep into aperture rings, there's something else Aaron mentions that I want to talk about.
Okay.
The collapsible design.
Yes.
So it gets smaller for storage, which is cool, but then you have to unlock it and extend it before you shoot.
Right.
Is it just me, or does that sound a bit like a transformer lens?
Well, it's a pretty common design choice, You gain portability, which is really nice for travel, or even just everyday carrying.
Yeah.
But you do have to add an extra step into your workflow.
Right.
And Aaron admits he usually prefers non-protruding zoom lenses.
Yeah.
But, he acknowledges those designs often come at a higher price.
Makes sense. Speaking of price,
Okay.
let's talk image quality.
Yeah.
Now, this is where things get real, right?
Uh-huh.
Aaron says the image quality is good,
Okay.
but not quite as mind-blowing as some of the pricier prime lenses in the GFX lineup.
Right. He specifically mentions the GF 45mm f2.8 and the GF 80mm f1.7 as being like on another level.
Right, but come on, those are prime lenses.
Well, yes, of course.
Everyone knows primes are sharper.
Right.
The real question is, how does this lens's sharpness stack up against, similar or even pricier zoom options within the GFX system?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not necessarily going to outperform the high-end primes.
Right.
But how does it do against other zooms in the GFX family? Like, how does it compare to the GF 32 64mm f4, for example?
Right. That's a great question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Aaron didn't have the 32 64mm on hand for a direct comparison.
Right.
But he does bring up the question of how they compare, which I think is super relevant to anyone considering this lens.
Yeah.
Because the 32 64mm is a little bit wider.
Okay.
It has a constant f4 aperture.
Right.
And it likely delivers better overall image quality, but it is also bigger and heavier.
Right.
And, of course, more expensive.
Yeah, so you're trading off those things.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe we should take a step back from all these comparisons.
Oh.
And focus on how Aaron actually used this lens.
Right.
Because he mentions it was his go-to lens during his GFX 50S2 review.
Exactly, yeah. He had a 23mm f4.
Right.
And a 250mm f4 with him, but it seems like the 35-70mm was his workhorse for most of the review.
Wow. So he was basically using it as a walk-around lens for a medium format camera.
Yeah.
That's kind of a big deal.
It is, especially when you consider that the focal length translates to 28-55 millimeter in full frame term.
Right.
So it's pretty versatile.
Yeah, that is a key consideration.
Yeah.
Especially for someone new to medium format.
Right.
To have that flexibility.
Exactly.
When you're still exploring the system.
Yeah.
And figuring out your style.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sold on the versatility, but how about performance?
Okay.
What did he say about autofocus?
Right.
And, well, the elephant in the room, the aperture.
Yeah.
It's an f4.5, 5.6 lens.
Right.
Which is definitely on the slower side.
It is, but, you know, we've also talked about how GFX cameras have really good high ISO capabilities.
True.
So that might help offset that a bit.
Okay, so maybe it's not as big of a deal as it seems at first glance.
Yeah, that's something we need to unpack.
Right.
So let's move on to the pros and cons that Aaron lists.
Okay.
And really get into who this lens is perfect for.
All right, let's do this.
Okay.
So you're saying this lens is small and light enough to be a walk-around lens for medium format. It's like the holy grail.
Right.
But I'm still a little hung up on that aperture.
Right.
Especially because Aaron mentions it's not as good as the primes in low light.
Yeah.
What exactly does he mean by that?
Right. Well, remember those primes he mentioned?
Yeah.
The 45 millimeter f2.8 and the 80 millimeter f1.7?
Right.
Those have wider maximum apertures.
Right.
Which means they can create that really nice blurry background.
The bokeh?
Exactly, the bokeh. And the 35-70 millimeter with its f4.5, 5.6 aperture won't be able to get that same level of subject separation.
Okay, so it's not just about low light performance.
Right.
It's also about the artistic possibilities.
Exactly.
That makes sense, but, you know, most people aren't shooting wide open all the time anyway.
Right.
How does it perform at, say, f8?
Yeah.
Is it sharp enough for landscapes and things like that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Aaron's review doesn't really get into sharpness across different apertures.
Right.
But he does say that the overall image quality is good.
Okay.
Which I think implies it's at least decent throughout the aperture range.
Right.
You know, if you're really obsessed with ultimate sharpness,
Right.
you might want to look for other reviews or sample images to get a better sense of that.
Okay, fair enough. But, you know, sometimes good enough is good enough.
Right.
Especially when you consider the price and versatility.
Exactly. It really comes down to your priorities.
Right.
If ultimate image quality is the most important thing to you, then maybe this isn't the lens for you. But if you want a balance of quality, affordability, and convenience, then it's definitely worth a look.
You have to weigh the trade-offs.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, let's actually look at Aaron's link of pros and cons.
Okay.
So for the pros, he lists affordability, weather resistance, compact size, lightweight build, and the versatile zoom range.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it.
Right. It seems like it checks all the boxes for a lens designed to appeal to a lot of different photographers, from beginners all the way up to experienced shooters.
Yeah, design.
Looking for a handy everyday lens.
Exactly.
And now for the cons, he lists the collapsible design and the lack of an aperture ring.
Yeah, we've already talked about those.
Right.
But it's worth repeating that they're kind of subjective.
Right.
Some people won't mind unfolding the lens, and some might actually prefer using the camera dials for aperture.
Yeah, it's all about personal preference.
Exactly.
Now you're probably wondering,
Yeah.
who is this lens really for?
Right.
And Aaron suggests it's a great starting point for the GFX system, especially as part of that bundle with the GFX 50S2.
Yeah, I mean, that bundle is basically a dream come true
Right.
for anyone who wants to try out medium format
Yeah.
without spending a ton of money.
But it's not just for newbies, right?
Sure.
Aaron also sees it as a good option for seasoned GFX photographers who want a versatile everyday zoom to complement their prime lens collection.
Exactly. Like, it's that reliable friend that you can always count on when you don't need to bring out your fanciest lenses.
I like that analogy.
Right.
So it fills that gap
Yeah.
in the GFX ecosystem.
Yeah.
For those times when convenience and flexibility are more important than absolute image perfection.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, we talked about the high ISO performance of modern cameras.
Right.
Which can help compensate for that slower aperture.
Exactly, especially if you're shooting in good light or using a tripod.
Right. Like, for landscapes,
Yeah.
you're probably not shooting wide open anyway.
Exactly. It's all about context.
Right.
So if you're someone who often shoots in really dim light, like for concerts or events,
Yeah.
then you might want to consider a faster prime lens.
Yeah.
Or a different GFX zoom with a wider maximum aperture. Okay, so we've established that this lens has a lot going for it. Price, size, versatility, and even decent image quality.
Right.
But are there any situations where you would absolutely not recommend this lens?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think if you're the kind of photographer who really pixel peeps and needs the absolute sharpest images, then yeah, maybe this lens isn't the best choice.
Okay.
Remember, Aaron said it didn't wow him like those high-end primes do.
Right, so it's not going to win any awards for sharpness.
Yeah.
But hey, sometimes character is more important than clinical perfection.
Right. It's like the difference between a perfectly polished studio portrait and a candid street photo that captures a real moment.
I like that you're bringing it back to the art.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the technical details.
It is.
But ultimately, it's about how you use the tools to tell your story.
Exactly. Speaking of stories, remember how Aaron briefly mentioned adapted lenses?
Oh, yeah. At the end.
Yeah.
What's the deal with adapted lenses?
Right.
Why would someone even consider that with the GFX system?
Well, for starters, it can save you a lot of money.
Okay.
GFX lenses are great, but they can be really expensive.
Right.
And adapting lenses from other systems, like Canon, can give you a lot more affordable options.
Okay.
Plus, it can be a way to use unique or vintage lenses that aren't available for GFX.
Okay, so it's like a way to expand your creative options without breaking the bank.
Yeah, it's like having a secret stash of vintage paint brushes that you can use to add a unique texture to your paintings.
Gotcha. But just like with those vintage paintbrushes, there are probably some trade-offs.
There are. Adapted lenses might not work as seamlessly as native GFX lenses.
Right.
And you might have to give up some autofocus speed or accuracy.
So it's a bit of an adventure.
Yeah.
But maybe a rewarding one.
Exactly.
It's like exploring a hidden alleyway. You never know what you might find.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the GF 3570mm.
Okay.
Knowing what we know now, what are your final thoughts on this lens?
Okay, so big picture.
Yeah.
It's not the sharpest, fastest, or most feature-packed lens in the GFX lineup.
Right.
But it is incredibly affordable.
Yeah.
Especially with that bundle.
Right.
It's compact, lightweight, weather-sealed, and it has a versatile focal range.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
It's a really well-rounded option that prioritizes practicality and accessibility, which makes it a great choice for a lot of GFX photographers.
And as you said earlier, it really depends on your own needs and your shooting style.
Exactly.
This lens won't be for everyone, but for the right person, it could be amazing.
I agree completely.
It's a great way to get into the GFX world.
Yeah.
But it's also a great lens on its own.
Right.
So I think we've covered a lot here.
Yeah, we have.
Aaron's review gave us a lot to think about.
It did, and I'm sure you're curious
to
hear what he has to say about those adapted lenses.
I am.
But we'll have to save that for another deep dive.
Yeah, you know me too well. But before we wrap up this episode, let's leave our listener with something to ponder.
Oh, I like that.
Okay, so listener, here's the challenge.
Okay.
Knowing the pros and cons of this GF 3570mm lens, would you choose this as your only GFX lens?
Right.
Would you pair it with specific primes? Or would you just go for a different zoom altogether?
Right.
What would you do?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And there's no right answer.
Right.
It all comes down to your own needs.
Exactly.
And shooting style.
That's what makes the GFX system so cool. There are so many options.
Yeah, it's a system that can grow with you as you get better and your needs change.
And even if you decide the 3570mm isn't right for you, it's still proof that medium format is more accessible than ever.
Exactly. You don't have to spend a fortune to get that amazing image quality and depth of field.
Like a gateway, but in a good way.
Right.
It gives you a taste of what's possible.
Right.
And then you can decide how far you want to go.
I love that.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe you'll end up with a whole bunch of adapted lenses.
Yeah.
And a whole new world of creative possibilities.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless.
So on that note, I think that we've really dissected this lens.
I think so too.
We've covered its strengths and weaknesses. And even looked at some alternatives.
Yeah.
So our listeners should have a good idea.
They should.
Of what this lens is all about.
Yeah.
and whether it's right for them.
Exactly.
And if they still have questions,
right,
that's what the comments are for.
Exactly. We love to hear from our listeners.
Yes.
And what they think about the gear we discuss.
So let us know your thoughts.
Would you buy this lens? What would you pair it with?
Yeah, tell us.
And if you have any suggestions for future deep dives,
yeah,
we're all ears.
We're always looking for new gear to explore.
All right, everyone. That's it for this deep dive.
Yep.
Into the Fujifilm GF 35-70mm lens. Hopefully you found it helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little fun.
And a little fun.
Until next time.
Happy shooting.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
Yeah.
How many different options there are for GFX shooters these days.
Right.
You've got primes, you've got zooms, and now you can even adapt lenses from other systems.
It's true.
It's like the choose your own adventure.
It is.
For photographers.
And that brings us back to that question you asked.
Right.
If you were building out your GFX kit,
yeah,
where would this 35-70 fit in?
Would it be your go-to lens?
Right.
Or would it just be your backup?
Or maybe it wouldn't even be in there at all.
Right. Maybe you'd go for like that 32-64 we talked about.
Yeah, maybe.
Or maybe you're all about primes.
Right.
And zooms just aren't your thing.
Exactly.
It's crazy how many different ways
it is.
You can go with the GFX system.
Yeah, there's no one right answer.
And that's what makes it so exciting.
I know.
It's a system that can change with you as your photography evolves.
Exactly. As you get better and your needs change.
And even if you decide the 35-70 isn't right for you, it still shows how much more accessible
it really does.
Medium format has become.
It's true. You don't have to spend a ton of money to get that amazing image quality and depth of field that medium format offers.
It's like a gateway drug, but like in the best way possible.
Right,
Like lets you see what's out there.
It gives you a little taste.
Yeah.
And then you can decide if you want more.
Exactly.
If you want to go further down the rabbit hole.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe that rabbit hole leads you to a whole collection of adapted lenses.
It could.
You know, a whole new world of creative possibilities.
It's true. The possibilities are endless.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of breaking down this 35-70mm lens.
I think so. We've covered a lot.
We've talked about its strengths and weaknesses. And even looked at some other options.
Right. So hopefully our listener has a good understanding of what this lens is all about.
And whether it's the right lens for them.
Exactly. And if they're still not sure, they can always leave us a comment.
That's what the comments are for.
Right. We always love hearing from our listeners.
Yeah, and what they think about the gear. So let us know what you think.
Yeah, tell us.
Would you buy this lens? What would you pair it with?
Would you use it as your only lens?
And if you have any suggestions for future deep dives, we'd love to hear them.
We're always looking for new and interesting gear to explore.
Okay, everyone, that's it for this deep dive into the Fujifilm GF 35-70mm lens.
Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoyed it.
And learned a lot.
And until next time, happy shooting.